Welcome back to Mindful of Tech. It's certainly been a while, but in this video we're going to be finally finishing the Windows 98 machine, plugging in the Pentiums, firing up the AGPs and getting ready to wallow in a beige milieu of yester computing. Before we build, let's head into the web for a deeper look at some of the salvaged hardware that will be making up Mindful of Tech's first official retro rig. Our pixel-pushing prowess is provided by the creative 3D blaster Banshee, an AGP video card built on the Voodoo Banshee chipset from legendary early GPU giants 3DFX. This card supports the features we will need for a realistic back-in-the-day type experience, with our system simulating a mid-range, mid to late 90s family computer just about up to gaming, a situation many of us older folks will have experienced growing up. With just a 250 MHz core clock and 16 MB of memory clocked at 100 MHz, this card, as Tech Powerup so helpfully pointed out, does not support DirectX 11 or DirectX 12. It might not be able to run all the latest games. We won't be visiting 2077 on this system, but that's okay, because instead it can take us back to a time before rays were traced to 1998. A 350 MHz Pentium 2 cartridge style CPU will be at the heart of our system. Slotted into the short-lived slot 1 style of CPU socket, this chip will provide us with enough grunt to run some stuff, and sometimes well. Both Intel and AMD had a brief love affair with this style of CPU in the late 90s, but reverted back to the arguably less robust but more familiar socket design for the new millennium. 256 MB of PC100 SD RAM. Enough for this system, enough for 98, enough for life. Enough said. A SoundBlaster PCI 128 provides us with all the period-accurate MIDI melodies and FM synth waveforms we could possibly need, with our PC speaker providing beefy bleeps and bloops for older titles. Back when you needed a sound card, you could not go far wrong with most of the Creative Labs SoundBlaster range. A high level of compatibility with popular 90s games should mean we have a good time with this card. Despite it not being top-end for the time, or held in particularly high regard by today's retro enthusiasts, it should be able to pleasantly tickle our ears with the oral nostalgia they so deserve. All this retro goodness has to be contained in the slots and headers of a motherboard we will call, despite no obvious branding on the board, a 443BX. This ATX board from probably Intel will talk to all our components, lovingly firing bits back and forth between them so that I, and you dear viewer, can experience the raw gaming power of the family computer we were sometimes allowed to play games on after tea if we'd been good back in the day. Power will be provided by a power supply from the power supply pile. A nondescript but hopefully not too shabby 145 watt SIX145M3 revision B1 will fill this role. Not new but working fine as far as my untrained eye can tell. Finally, we have our incidentals, such as our CD/hard/floppy/compact flash drives. All of this will be carefully inserted into the beige belly of a classic Fox Systems branded case we cleaned up in the previous video. Okay, so now that we've familiarised ourselves with the hardware, let's put this thing together. A couple of honourable mentions that weren't in the VT that you saw. We do have a network card, just in case I want to chuck files on and off the thing via the network that I have here, and of course a pile of fans to provide cooling. We'll have a deeper look into how that's going to be configured when we actually start putting the thing inside the case. So without further ado, let's restorate and ruminate on the Windows 98 official Mindful of Tech retro gaming rig. So first things first, we're going to put this thing together. Now, the easiest way I find personally to put computers together, even to this day on modern systems, is to install things like the RAM and the CPU outside of the case so that you've got something to hold on to when you need to position it in place, because quite often the heatsink and cooling arrangement for the CPU can be a good handle to get hold of. I don't know why I did that so aggressively. And obviously in this case we have this nice sturdy slot that we can simply slot our CPU right into. Now you can see that I don't have a fan on this heatsink at the moment. It is going to need cooling. it did have a tiny little fan on it that was super loud, so I'm probably not going to be putting that same one back on it. I will probably be somehow jury rigging this slightly larger, slightly quieter fan up to it, but again, we'll figure that out when we get to it. So let's make ourselves a little bit of room here. And get this slot 1 CPU slotted. We can get it in without breaking it. There we go. And that's it. Just like a Mega Drive cartridge. Didn't blow on it first, but hopefully we won't need to do that. And then of course we have our RAM. So I don't think it matters which slots we put our RAM in. Let's go for the back slots. Just for the look of the thing. And that is the wrong way round. So actually we'll put our nice Fox System labelled RAM stick in first. You may have noticed there are a few bits of the system that have a Fox System label on. You know, in the case of the CPU, it's actually covering up a nice shiny Intel holographic sticker, but I felt that they were appropriate and I wanted to honour the original system integrator that built this machine, Fox Systems, who I kept meaning to look up on the internet but never actually got around to. I assume they're no longer in business. But we're keeping their stickers on just as we will be reattaching the Fox System branding to the front of the case as well. So that's it. That's essentially as much as I need to build the computer outside of the case. CPU in place, RAM in place. Those two things are much easier to do outside of the case than in. So with that done, let's move everything off to one side so that we can work on the case a little bit. Now this contains all the screws and bits and bobs that I took out of the case when we originally cleaned it, including the Fox Systems badge. So if you remember, this is a one-piece case, if you like, with the top and side panels all being in one large piece of metal. And there's our nice PC speaker firing up into this cage here. And first things first, let's get our power supply in place. Boink. Easy as that. Screw number one. It is the first official Mindful of Tech official screw, and it doesn't fit. The thread is too thin. Hooray! Right, okay. And there we are. One power supply screwed in and ready to go. It's time to get our motherboard in place. Now this case has nice pronounced standoffs for loading the motherboard onto, so it's very obvious where they go. Sometimes you have to try a few different things in a few different holes until you find what works for you, just like in life. Right, motherboard in. Ugh. Next up, we have our cards. So, before we do anything else, we're going to get our CD, floppy, Another such drive is inserted. So this actually has 8 screws total to hold in a floppy drive. 1, 2, 3, 4, then 5, 6, 7, 8 on the other side. I'm definitely not going to be putting 8 screws in there. I'm not that worried about my floppy drives. That is our... So you can see here we've got primary and secondary IDEs. I'm going to pop the CDs in the secondary. Okay, so this IDE is actually not compatible with this motherboard because it doesn't have, it's got the pin there filled in. So yes, as you can see, we have a filled in pin, which is very much present in the actual slots on the motherboard. So I'm not sure exactly what, you can see it's actually coming away from the back here where the thing's broken as well. So I'm not sure what that means in terms of the old standard. I'm sure that means that this is a different type of IDE cable. But for our purposes, all we want is something that's going to fit, and I'm pretty sure it will just work. So let's see whether or not we can find any more IDE cables. Before we pop that in, I'm just going to give it a quick clean. Because I had cleaned that other one ready to go in. And I do not want dirty cables in my nice new / old computer. That'll do. And then reinsert. And that is our power in place and ready. Okay, just had to stop for a moment there because I managed to fill my cameras right up. This is taking a little bit longer than I expected, so there'll be a bit of a jump cut. But what I have done in the meantime is found an adapter which is going to let me plug in the compact flash and the floppy at the same time and hopefully power both. I've also figured out that the power switch, the power LED is supposed to be plugged into the key lock. For whatever reason, it functions as a power LED, and that is in fact how it was plugged in originally. I pulled up the original 4K footage of the down-firing camera from when I first took this apart, and indeed that is where that bit appears to go. So that is all now functioning correctly, and I've unplugged the CD drive at the top just so I can get power to this hard drive, basically so we can make sure all of the essential components are working. All I need to do is find a way of powering that second CD drive, although in reality I don't actually need either of them. The floppy drive will come in useful. I do have some stuff on floppy that I would have no other way of getting at, but as far as CDs and things go, obviously I can move CD images from, you know, modern computers and do all that stuff. So in theory we don't exactly need one, but it is a nice to have because I'd like to be able to install games directly. I guess really that's all that there is left to install at this point is the fans. So let's get on with that. Okay, so we have both fans in. Our final fan, this one here, this is going to want to cool the CPU. My plan is just very simply to insert it in there with a sticky pad on the front and hope that that is enough to just hold it onto the heatsink there. There is a power plug just down there, so I'm going to get one of these nice foam double-sided pads, Poundland Special. Got various sort of fans held in my server and other projects that I've just used these on, so you know they seem to be pretty good. Hopefully it won't melt into the fins as it heats up. So I'll try and get that relatively central. So making sure that it's blowing air over the heatsink, not sucking air off the heatsink. And then finally, we will get this plugged into. Cool. So that is all of our fans plugged in. Let's make sure they all work. We will plug that back in, turn it on. Oof. Oof. Oh, I just caught myself on that fan there. It's spinning real fast. I was trying to figure out what's making so much noise. Seems like, oh dear, I'm bleeding. Right, BRB. Don't stick your finger in the fan. Appears to be functioning. We have good airflow coming in from the front, good airflow coming out of the back. PC speaker's working. Not sure if the hard drive light is working. Not sure how that marries up to the activity on this thing, but we'll figure that out once we have it set up. So, here she be. Almost complete. You may have noticed that we have a couple of panels missing at the front here, exposing an area that I had originally earmarked when I first discussed this case for some sort of diorama or display that I was going to illuminate with some Poundland LEDs. Fortunately, friend of the channel and friend of mine, Rob Shark, he had a much better idea and has actually 3D printed me a custom panel showing the Windows 98 kind of boot image, which will let the light through and hopefully create a really good effect once it's in there with my Poundland LEDs in behind it. So let's get that installed, attach the case badge, finish off the final finishing touches, get the side panel on this thing, and then see whether or not it boots. So here we have the Fox computer system. I have just added some sticky tape to the back of that, so that's the Fox Computer Systems badge. It's going to go right on the front, just here. Okay. Oh, look at that. See, now unfortunately there's just a slight line where the double-sided tape is, but I'm not going to worry too much about that for now. Short of like re-silvering the back and turning it back to its original shiny thing, which I have no idea how to do. Not really sure how you would put that in without showing lines. Do let me know if you have any ideas. As far as I could work out, things like super glue and that sort of thing are going to make it cloudy, or they're going to eat into the rubber of this badge. So I figured that that was probably the safest way to do it for the time being. Now this panel should, I'm hoping, just fit in here and sort of hold itself in. It has been measured to be the height of 2 drives, and will hopefully, with a little bit of persuasion. Okay, so there's going to be a bit of light bleed on either side of it, but that's probably something that we could fix up with some sealant or something like that. For now, I think that's going to sit in there nicely enough, and obviously as there's other modifications that we're going to need to do, possibly replace this drive if it's not functioning properly and some other bits and pieces, I will just leave it in there loose for now. But that looks sick. Thank you so much, Rob. That's so cool. Let's get some light behind it and see what it looks like. So if you recall, we had some Poundland LED strips. They're actually £2 from Poundland. They're white LEDs. I've got a couple. This out of its packet because I used it at Halloween to do a Halloween display, but we've also got this one which actually came off the router that was up there that used to have LEDs around it. Now what's interesting about this strip is it's actually gone slightly orange. It's sort of coloured. You can actually see, if you look, that this one has actually changed colour. I guess that's as the rubber sort of perishes, because obviously these are cheap Poundlandy ones. Now what's quite cool about this is it gives off a slightly warmer light than the other strip. So what I'm going to do is try this one and see if it gives us a slightly yellow light, if maybe some of that light will come through and kind of match the yellowed front of the case. Overthinking it, I know, but I think it looks kind of cool. So the only thing that we don't have in here is many USB ports. That's okay, because we'll be putting a PS2 keyboard and mouse on it. I've got 2 ports at the back, so this will plug in to one of those ports. And then we can probably run it back in through one of the serial ports on the back here. We'll open one of those up. I just want to see lengthwise what we're dealing with. Okay, so I've literally just slung the LED strip in there for now. What I want to do is just power it up and see what that looks like, just to get an idea of how much light this thing lets through. It should, in theory, just come on when I hit the power button. Oh, yes. Oh, look at that. That is glorious. Oh, wow. So, I mean, it kind of works. It's just chucked in there like that. We'll see if we can make it a bit neater. I wonder what is making that noise. So, I managed to get it stuck in sort of roughly around the back, as you can see when that comes on. That should provide fairly even illumination into the back there. Okay. pretty cool. This system is real loud. Absolutely beautiful. I could not be happier with this build. Period perfect hardware and a good looking case modded just enough to feel truly mine. Sure, we have a few issues to iron out, but those will be fixed by the time we meet again, which will hopefully be very soon. If you enjoyed what you saw here today, like and of course subscribe. If you did not, there is a button for that too. Or if you have feelings more complex than a simple button click can represent, then why not type out a comment below. Until next time, stay safe and be well.